In my last video, I did a deep dive into the science behind mewing and orthotropics, where I covered Dr. Mike Mew and his current battle where he is fighting for the faces of the world. If you want to support Dr. Mike and his cause, the link will be in the bio, or you can go to the Orthotropics official YouTube channel or site to donate. In today's podcast, I do have a very special guest, one of the most brilliant minds in academia for health, greatest orthodontist in human history, and the father of orthotropics, Dr. John Mew. In this segment, part one of the podcast, we talk about Professor John Mew's life, the history of orthotropics, and the response from the orthodontic community at large to orthotropics. Before we start, if you want to grab my personal diet plan, my workout plan, my coaching, if you have any other questions or need advice, you can contact me on Zoom or Instagram. I'm also working on a whole range of evidence-based testosterone-safe products to help combat the issue of men's testosterone levels decreasing rapidly. These will be coming soon to the channel for you to check out, and as we now know from the evidence, your facial bone morphology can change from chewing firm gum. If you want to grab the mastic gum that is evidence-based, all links will be in the bio below.
Hello, there we are.
Yes, awesome. Well, nice to see you, Professor, Dr. John Mew.
Right, anytime.
Okay. Would you prefer, say, the term professor, or do you prefer doctor?
I don't mind, whichever. I'm
Okay. Both. Okay. What I was, I guess, hoping to achieve with the podcast today is I've seen online, there's been many interviews with your son, Michael, Dr. Mike Mew,
Yes.
who's very famous online. Obviously, he's developed orthotropics in the modern sort of sense, but
Yes, he's good.
of course, when it comes to the origin of your story, where did it all begin with for yourself when it came to the idea of orthotropics and I guess your early life? I mean, a bit of a background and start on that.
Yes, my father was an orthodontist, and he was trained 100 years ago in the UK. And at that time, one of the prime treatments was to expand the upper jaw. You know what expansion is?
Yes.
Yes, it's a clinical treatment where they widen the jaw, and that makes room for the teeth. He was taught to do that for children of 4 or 5 years of age, and that was the standard treatment 100 years ago in England. However, I qualified 25 years later, and when I went to a dental school, they told me that nobody expanded anymore because it always relapsed. And so I didn't expand. But my father died quite young, actually, and I studied his results of his treatment. And I found that, yes, the expansion did often relapse. It often relapsed 2/3 of the amount you had widened, sometimes only 1/3, but occasionally it hardly relapsed at all, and every now and again it went on widening after he had completed the expansion. That told me that clearly there are some other factors responsible for the width of the maxilla. And I then went on exploring them, and eventually I decided that if the tongue was in the palate, then the maxilla would not relapse. And that was really the basis of my treatment, and of also the tropic premise, if you've heard of that, which is the basis of all orthotropic treatment.
It's you know, when you're referring to these early methods, they were using for maxillary expansion, I'm assuming surgery, or were they using like brackets and retainers and things like that for the very...
It was long, this was 100 years ago, long before brackets existed. They just used a plate which clipped into the mouth with a screw in the middle of it, and you open the screw a quarter of a turn every 2 or 3 days.
Okay.
And that widened the maxilla.
And what you're saying is this previous method, it tended to relapse, didn't it?
Well, yes, all expansion will relapse if the tongue is not in the palate.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. I was reading a study about this actually the other day. It was about facial asymmetry, and there was
Yes.
sometimes the condition, and it's related to orthotropics. People are born completely symmetrical, and then by the time they may be a teenager, for some reason, they've got a lopsided face. And there was one, I think it was a study from Japan. They did sleeping face down. I mean, surprisingly, it's not surprising at all. That would have some sort of an effect on your facial. Smoking apparently as well, and also chewing on one side. So I think that for anyone to think that what we do habitually that doesn't have an effect, it absolutely does. I think that more and more people are sort of coming to light with that. Hence why I think orthotropics is so popular now.
Well, you're talking of another problem, really, unilateral development, and that has a number of causes, but most of them are postural. But they often start with a distortion in the birth canal when the baby is born, and therefore they are born a bit lopsided. And that may or may not improve. What will make it better or worse is essentially the way you hold your tongue, your lips, and your jaw. That has a huge influence on the lack of balance in the face.
Interesting. When did you first start to come to this realization of tongue posture?
I would think in the late 60s and early 70s, maybe a bit earlier than that.
And you just came across this via your observations from the patients that you were seeing.
Yes, yes, I'm an inquisitive guy. If there's a problem, I like to know the answer.
And you would have started to see people, there was a correlation between, say, the mouth being open and everything sort of being drawn back.
Oh, very much so, yes. I'm very observant. My father taught me a very important message. He said, there is a reason for everything. And therefore, whenever I see something that seems unusual, I always want to know what the reason is. And I know there is a reason, whether I can understand it or not. And I will often spend days, weeks, sometimes even years trying to work out what the reason is. And I think that is why I've come up with many different ideas.
My next question, you decided to become a dentist, or did your father sort of push you in this direction?
No, I could see my father enjoyed being a dentist, and so I decided to be a dentist, and my son could see that I enjoyed it, so he decided to be a dentist.
So your father's father, was his profession also dentist as well, or no?
My father's father was an architect.
Similar. I mean, different sort of structures, but I mean, you could consider yourself an architecture of the face. My next question, how does orthotropics, and because we've got a lot of listeners, a lot of people on Reddit that are still new to orthotropics and mewing, how does orthotropics, in your own definition, differ from, say, traditional orthodontics?
Oh, it's totally different. Traditional orthodontics is mechanical and surgical and uses considerable force. Orthotropics is guided purely by posture. Now, most people, and certainly most orthodontists, do not believe that. The forces involved in posture amount to about 1 or 2 grams per tooth. The forces in orthodontics normally are between about 30 and 50 grams per tooth, but they're very often over 100 grams per tooth. And that causes a lot of damage. People don't realize how frequently teeth are actually lost, because when you move them with too much force, it damages the root. I had a tennis partner when I was in my 20s, and she told me, she said, "John, my front teeth feel a bit loose." She had had orthodontic treatment, and I said, "Come on down to my surgery. I'll take some x-rays and we'll see." And when I took the x-rays, I found that the roots of her front teeth had almost entirely disappeared, and she lost 3 of her front teeth at the age of 27. Now, that it does not happen often, but you can imagine what a disaster it is, and it's due entirely to orthodontists who use too much force to move the teeth.
And from the research as well, the teeth will tip, actually, if I'm not mistaken, and that's one thing you've spoken about before, which is the teeth tipping.
Oh, yeah.
And that's
Well,
from
does
using.
it matter if they tip? Orthodontists think teeth should be upright. So when orthodontists move teeth, they move them like this. Now, when I move teeth, I move them like that. Then I wait for them to upright on their own. That causes hardly any damage. But if you move the tooth through the bone, particularly if you do that with a lot of force, then the root is damaged and the tooth will be lost early. It amazes me that there are hundreds of orthodontic research projects showing that they severely damage the roots when they treat, and yet they still do it. When I ask them why, they say it's the only way we can move teeth, as though that's an excuse. But I'm sure you would agree with me that it's not an excuse. The Hippocratic Oath says that you should never do any harm. And orthodontists do a huge amount of harm with their fixed appliances. And I frankly think fixed appliances should be made illegal.
And would that be via, say, pressure necrosis on the tooth, via pressure, and it causes some sort of necrosis on the
Well,
teeth?
it is a form that I could explain it in detail if you want, but the tooth is fixed into the bone. It feels very rigid, doesn't it? But actually it's on a sling of tissue which supports it. That sling is very sensitive. If you move the tooth too much, then the blood will be squashed against the side of the tooth, and there will be no blood to the cells. And if that happens for more than a few hours, the cells will die. That is why there is so much root resorption.
Yeah, it's absolutely sort of fascinating. I think that just like any other tissue in the body, if you constrict it, you will cause damage, just like anything
Oh,
else.
lots of damage. And they know it. They do. No orthodontist would say they don't damage the teeth. They just say it's the only way we can get straight teeth, as though that doesn't matter.
Based upon when you had first started to come across this and you had started to realize that there was this issue, what did your colleagues think in the late 60s, early 70s when you first started to realize this? Did you mention this to anyone?
Well, I used to have long discussions with them, and they would say, we don't agree with that. And I would say, I don't agree with that. But eventually I went on to say, look, you must change. They didn't want to change. And in the end, they threw me out of the Orthodontic Association because I disagreed with them. I went on disagreeing with them, and eventually they took away my license for practice. Did you know that?
I did,
I'm
yeah.
no longer an orthodontist or even a dentist, because they said, you're not fit, we're going to take your license away. So that's what happens if you disagree with the establishment.
Did they give you any legitimate reason at all, or was it just that we don't agree with you?
Well, they held a trial, but the witnesses and the jury and the judge were all orthodontists. So they knew I was wrong to start with.
Wrong by sort of their definition. Was there any support from other colleagues for you who might have done similar works, or?
Very few people, well, so nobody agreed with me at that time. And even now, most orthodontists think I'm wrong. They still go on using fixed appliances.
With the topic of the mewing tongue posture, this was your discovery and your creation of when we press our tongue against the roof of our mouth.
Well, you make it my discovery. It is the natural position. Everybody should have their tongue in the palate. I can see that you don't, and that your lips are apart quite often. You're quite flat in your cheeks like I am, and your jaw is quite narrow. Yes, it's okay. I can see. No need to turn sideways.
So you can see this from the front.
Yes, and your lips are apart far too much. But that is because you were brought up in a modern lifestyle. You probably didn't breastfeed for more than 6 months. Your mother probably fed you with spoons and cups and bottles, all of which damaged the development of your jaws and face.
It's very interesting you mentioned that. I was weaned a little bit later than others. It's a interesting sort of topic on that. I do know though that the soft food.
I can't hear all you're saying. Sorry.
I was going to say I was actually breastfed for a very extended amount of time.
Good.
And my mother was always a proponent of, and she had always mentioned this, I think she studied this when she was at school, when you're breastfed, you're getting nutrients that you'll only ever get from breast milk and nowhere else.
Yes.
But what I think is even more interesting is what you're saying is the actual method of actually suckling.
Right. That's it. Nearly all mothers spoon feed their children. I'm sure you were spoon fed. You should not use a spoon or a cup before the age of 2.5, 3 years, because that will upset the posture of the tongue. Do you know that more than 90% of children who are brought up in a modern environment have incorrect tongue posture?
It makes sense. Statistic that honestly modern lifestyle is definitely contributing to. You knew about Dr. Weston Price when you were
Yes,
first.
my father brought me up on Weston Price.
How popular was he with the other orthodontists during that time?
They thought he was nonsense. My father believed him, and I could see people often get muddled because Weston Price believed two things. One, he believed in natural upbringing, but two, he believed in he was against processed food. Now, many of his followers today think that processed food is the main cause of malocclusion, but I am sure that it is bad posture which is the main cause of malocclusion. But that is just a difference of opinion between myself and many of those who believe in Weston Price.
Could it be said that the firmer foods might strengthen the masseter, the temporalis, all of the facial muscles to keep everything closed from, say, Weston Price, and therefore it's also related to tongue posture? Do you think there's a connect between those two concepts, maybe?
I think he was absolutely right about that. What I don't agree with him is the food values. He was saying you should have more certain types of food, not because of their consistency, but because of their content. And I don't think the content makes much difference to malocclusion.
When he was talking about content, was he more so referring to like nutrients and, like calcium and
Well,
stuff
mainly
like that?
vitamins and minerals and things like that. I don't think they cause malocclusion.
So it's very interesting stuff, Weston Price. He was a very sort of big name on this. Was there anyone else who you might have looked towards besides Price?
Not really. He was very much alone, I think, as I am. If you have a different opinion, you will be, I think, discredited by your profession.
Yeah. It's very, I think it's a very lonely journey, but I think that what happens is because you're venturing into sort of an uncharted territory, I think a lot of people will see you standing out there alone and question it until they see the path you've walked. And I think it's only till that happens they will start to sort of come around on it. Your father was also a believer in your methods. Was he somebody who sort of had planted these seeds?
Well, not of my methods, because he was dead by the time I had developed them. But I base my belief on a lot of his beliefs.
Okay. Realistically, the role of facial growth in orthotropics, on somewhat of a technical term, how does orthotropics influence the face and the airway?
Well, if you widen the upper jaw, you will open the airway. That is automatic. I imagine you have slight difficulty with your airway because you, like me, I have a very narrow face. But if you have a full width face, you can breathe through your nose quite easily.
I have some issues actually with snoring from time to time, which I think is a very interesting observation. When it comes to that topic, sleep apnea, do we really think that sleep apnea is a modern issue? Do you think that sleep apnea was something that's only come into play maybe in the last, century or so? Or do you think that sleep apnea has always been around to some degree?
No, the only people who snore are people who have long faces like me and a bit like you. Snoring is a clear indication of sleep apnea, and when you are in your 60s and 70s, you'll have problems with that.
Yeah. What would you say would be I guess, the ultimate benefit of orthotropics and overall health. So we know about breathing, posture. What other factors could be a byproduct of doing orthotropics on health?
Essentially, if you grow correctly, your face will grow about 20 or 30 millimeters further forward. This part of my face is set back by over an inch. And that is why I do tend to snore and have difficulties breathing. Orthotropics is totally different from orthodontics. Orthodontic treatment pulls the face back. If the front teeth stick out, orthodontists will pull them back. But an orthotropist, if the front teeth stick out, say, this is how, can you see how I am here now? I'm trying to hold, that's right. Now that's how the teeth should be. Some people, but if growth goes wrong, the lower jaw drops and the top jaw does that. So you're then left like that, you see, with the top teeth sticking out. But actually, the top teeth should be further up and forward. Now, orthodontists correct that by pulling the top teeth back. But an orthotropist would correct it by pushing the top teeth forward and then bringing the lower teeth forward to it. You understand, one is pulling back, the other is pulling forward.
So essentially,
an orthotropist will pull forward about 20 or 30 millimeters. That is a huge difference.
And this is what you would refer to as what we call, the facial upswing. Is that what this?
Yeah, it's sort of, yes, because the teeth should, I can't do that. The teeth should be like that. When they go wrong, they drop down and back like that. And that is a facial downswing. And the correction of that is to push both the upper and lower jaws upwards and forwards. Then you get a correct shaped face. You get someone who can breathe easily and doesn't have sleep apnea. You haven't mentioned temporomandibular joint problems, TMD, but of course they're also caused by the jaws being too far back. But also nearly all ear, nose, and throat problems are caused by the face being too far back. And they will all improve if you take the face forward. Also, all malocclusion is caused by the face being too far back. And you can improve that by taking it forward. Also, all unattractive faces are caused by the face being too far back. So that's 5 reasons why it is very important to take the face forward. And yet orthodontists know and admit that their treatment takes it back.
I think it would be very frustrating in a field where I think that you can see all of these things happening. And I mean, look, your colleagues, surely one of them would have said, hey, look, he's onto something here.
Well, you would think so, wouldn't you? But if you look at medicine, they tend to group together. They used to, the old phenomenon of letting blood?
Yeah.
This was back in the 1600s,
Leeches.
even earlier than that. They used to cut an artery and bleed people to get rid of the bad or whatever they were. And there are lots of examples of bad medicine, which, remember, people didn't use to sterilize at all until eventually they found that if you wash your hands between operations, your patients live much longer. So many of these things were found. The process of eating vegetables when you go to sea. You know, vitamin C shortage. They didn't know what it was for years. And then this chap found that if you gave people fruit, they wouldn't get scurvy. It was just one man's observation. But until, I don't know what makes people change their mind. Most people don't like to change their mind if they have been given a professional training and told that X equals Y. They don't want to change, even if they see obvious evidence that they're wrong. They will resent it. That's why they threw me out of the association, because I was disagreeing with them.
Going on to a different topic, your son, Mike, has become unbelievably popular. The popularity of orthotropics is, I think it was online, it's been viewed hundreds of billions of times, you know, if you spread across YouTube and like TikTok. There's been, honestly, there's like probably millions of orthotropic anecdotes online if you were to add them all up one by one. I think that when so many anecdotes of something actually comes out, I think that anecdotal pressure or evidence surely should account for something, right? In some sort of regard, to trigger at least, I guess, the thought and the conversation about so many people are saying this is working. It's showing, you know, forward growth is occurring. People are doing this themselves at home. Maybe we should investigate this.
Well, I mean, mewing is basically, I mentioned the tropic premise. The tongue should be on the palate, the lips together, the teeth in or near contact. And that is what mewing is. It's just a new name to the hypothesis I put forward in the late 1970s. It's not, all this has happened because of the media. If it hadn't been for the media, nobody would know about orthotropics, or maybe half a dozen people. But now, I believe on TikTok recently, there were 2 billion hits on orthotropics. Well, it was actually on mewing.
It's very popular. So do you think that your son Mike has been a huge factor in popularizing it, maybe because of YouTube and TikTok and the internet? Because he does post videos on, and of course yourself on the Orthotropics YouTube.
The dental authorities in England have removed my license to keep me quiet so that the public doesn't know about orthotropics. But they then decided to do the same to my son. I was 85 years old when they removed my license, so it really didn't make much difference to me. In fact, it's allowed me now to say what I think, whereas beforehand, I had to be careful about representing my profession. But I'm not an orthodontist anymore. Therefore, I can say what I like as a member of the public. But my son, they have decided to remove his license so that he won't be able to practice orthotropics in England. Now, he's up in court at this very moment, and they may find him guilty. Remember, they represent both the judge and the jury. Therefore, the odds are against him. But I intend at some point to take the authorities to the High Court. In a High Court, we will have a fair trial, and the truth will be considered rather than just people's opinions.
It's quite shocking, isn't it? And I think that this story is really shocking, because I think that so many people can see that there's some benefit and at least some degree of evidence and effectiveness for this. But it's quite shocking
Don't
that
you believe it? It's opinions which control medicine, not science.
egos as well.
I'm sure opinions are always more important than science.
With Mike, who had really put this against him? Was he sort of trying to get some sort of study done for orthotropics? And then is that when all of this had sort of come down on him? Because this has been going on a lot longer than what people realize. It's been going on for, like, with Michael in particular, quite a long time. Was there a
Yes.
particular situation that had happened where he had maybe requested and they said, no, we're going to take you to court? I mean, how did it all go down?
Yes, I think the problem is, as I said, if you know you're right, you do not listen to people who give you another opinion. I have done a lot of research which has shown without any reasonable doubt that orthotropics will make faces grow forward 20 or 30 millimeters. As I say, most orthodontics takes faces back. But although I have done these papers, they've been published, they've been approved by many people, orthodontists still reject them. They won't publish them in their own literature. You know, they have many orthodontic magazines. They will never publish my papers. I have to publish them in other magazines. Then the orthodontists say, oh, John Mew has no literature in any recognized magazines. And I can't answer that.
I think they're very sneaky with their methods. I think honestly, what they're trying to do, they're definitely trying to, I guess, sway the public opinion on that. But I think we both know, like, when something is being censored so heavily, there's obviously some sort of ulterior motive at play. Most likely, this censorship that they're trying to.
Yeah, you're talking about motives. By and large, orthodontists have been trained and invested huge sums of money in doing what they do. I'm saying they're wrong, but they really don't want to admit that. Now, you and I are just as guilty. What we believe, we want to go on believing. We don't like having our minds changed. And orthodontists are just the same as you and me. They don't want to admit it. Therefore, subconsciously, they resent anything that suggests we're right.
So this wraps up the first part of the podcast with Dr. John Mew. I'm going to be catching up with Dr. John later on in the week, where I'm going to be filming part 2. I do apologize as well. The Zoom footage that we took was very glary and crackly, so I'm going to be setting up a better home office for the second part of the interview, where I ask all of the questions requested. Also, guys, if you like the video, like and subscribe. And of course, go and check out Dr. Mike Mew on the official Orthotropics YouTube channel if you want to get more information on what Orthotropics is. And go and check out the documentary where I deep dived into the science behind mewing and orthotropics as well. So that's it, guys, for part 1. Thanks again, and I'll hopefully see you guys next week.